Now, toward the end of the 80s of the 20th century, you set up the Center for the Study of Democracy.
I did.
At what is today the University of Westminster. And those were moments in the history of the modern world when more nations were joining the democratic club. There was euphoria about this. But when I met you just 3 years later, it was about 1992 that we met, we were actually seeing the first sign of an attack on democracy because of what happened in Algeria. Where do you see the world today?
Well, it's true that there was a phase of euphoria that, in my own work, I think I trace back really to the years after 1945. It wasn't just a product of the so-called Velvet Revolutions of 1989 to 91. I mean, the renaissance of democracy should be credited to India. In 1945, it is a miracle that any power-sharing constitutional democracy survived in the European region. Britain was one of the very few exceptions, and even it was in trouble. Of course, there was America, New Zealand, Canada, Australia. But on the face of the earth, there had been a serious half-century-long crisis that almost destroyed democracies. And out of the ruins came totalitarian forms of power, dictatorship, monarchies, the restoration of monarchy. And India, this completely surprising development, with no thanks to the British, and no support from
Despite the British, actually.
Despite the British, it managed to create a new model of power sharing that today survives despite everything, despite the violence, despite the pauperization, despite the conflict of religion and ethnicity. And so the renaissance of democracy is traceable back to that period, and we then saw the collapse of dictatorships in Latin America, in the Philippines. We saw, of course, the heroic Polish events of 1980, 1981, and the resistance to Soviet power. And we saw these events culminate, so to say, in those revolutions of 89 to 91. And it's not surprising that many journalists and intellectuals, writers, politicians even, saw that this was a great triumph of democracy. It was done without much historical understanding, with a lot of amnesia, and a lot of inflated expectations. And as you rightly say, by the early 90s, the signs of decadence, of instability, of hypocrisy concerning democracy began to surface. And we are now living in times in which one can say there is a bad moon rising over democracy everywhere.